Hello everyone and welcome to Rajput, Jain and Associate. In this video we will discuss about ESIC registration. So let us begin with what is Employee State Insurance Corporation. So Employee State Insurance Corporation or ESIC is a self-financing social responsibility and health insurance scheme which provides medical benefit, sickness benefit, maternity benefit and various other benefits such as funeral expenses, free supply of physical aids etc. to the employees and their families. So the units or establishments that have 10 or more employees drawing the wages up to Rs 15,000 a month are required to be registered for ESIC under the ESI Act 1948. The benefits provided by the scheme are funded from the contributions raised from covered employees and their employers at a fixed percentage of wages. At present, covered employees contribute 1.75% of the wages to the ESIC and their respective employers contribute 4.75% of the wages that is payable to their employees. Next we have the documents required for ESI registration. So firstly we will discuss about the documents to be submitted by the employer. These are the registration certificate or the license that is issued under the Shop and Establishment Act or the Factories Act 1948. Next is the address proof, which can be their latest rent receipt or the premises which they are occupying, indicating the capacity in which the premises are occupied. Next is the latest building tax or property tax receipt. Then the memorandum and the article of association or their partnership deed or trust deed depending upon the type of entity which is applying for the registration. Next is the photocopy of the certificate of commencement of production or the registration number under the CST or GST when it becomes applicable. Next one is the copy of PAN card. Then the evidence in support of the date of commencement of the production or the business, that can be the copy of their first invoice. Next is the month-wise employment position, their salary and other information. Next and the last one on behalf of the employers is copy of bank statement. Next comes the documents that are to be submitted by the employees. First is if any employee is already registered under ESIC, then they have to provide their employee insurance number and the date of appointment. However, if the employee is not registered under ESIC, then they have to provide their name, the name of their father or husband, their date of birth, their address which is their permanent address, then the date of their appointment, then their bank account details which shall state their account number, branch name and IFSC code. Next is the details of their nominees in which they have to provide their name, address, mobile number, email ID and the relationship with the nominee. Next is the details of the previous employer, the employer code number, the employer's insurance number, name of the employer, address of employer and lastly the contact number of the employer. Now we come on to the applicability of ESIC registration. So the following establishments that are employing more than 10 persons attract ESIC coverage, that is the shops, hotels and restaurants that are not having any manufacturing activity but are providing certain kind of services, cinema halls, roadside motor transport establishments, newspaper establishments, private educational institutions and medical institutions. Next, we come on to the ESIC registration process. So earlier there was a manual registration process. However, now the ESIC registration is completely online. So now in order to register for ESIC registration, the applicant is required to follow very simple steps. These are, first of all, step 1 is logging into the ESIC portal. Herein, the employer needs to get himself registered on the ESIC portal. So the employer can register on the ESIC portal by clicking on the employer login option on the home screen. On the next page, click on the sign up button. After clicking on the sign up button, the employer would be required to fill in the requisite details and submit the said form. After comes the step 2, which is the confirmation mail. So after submitting the form for sign up on the portal, the employer will receive a confirmation mail which is sent on their registered email ID and mobile number at the time of registration. The email will contain the username and password details for registering as an employer and an employee under the ESIC scheme. Next step 3 is employer registration form 1. So after having the login details, the employer will have to log in into the ESIC portal by clicking on the employer login option on the home screen and entering the username and the password which they have already received on their email. This will redirect the employer to the page having the option of new employer registration. So then the employer will have to click on the new employer registration option and then select the type of unit from the drop down list and click on the submit button. The employer's registration form 1 will appear and the employer would be required to fill in the requisite details in the said form. On the employer registration form 1, the employer needs to enter the details pertaining to the unit of the employer, employer details, factory or the establishment details, and lastly the employee's details. Once the said form is completed by the employer, he or she needs to click on the submit button. After this comes the step 4, which is the payment of registration fees. So once the submission of ESI registration form 1 is done, then the person would be required to make the payment on the payment of advance contribution, wherein the employer needs to fill the amount to be paid and select the payment mode. The employer will need to pay advance contribution for 6 months. After this comes the step 5, which is the registration letter. So on successful payment of 6 months advance contribution, the system generated registration letter C11 is sent to the employer, which will contain a 17-digit registration number by the ESIC registration department. The registration letter C11 is a valid proof of registration of the employer. Now we come on to the benefits of ESIC registration. So the benefits of registering under this scheme are varied. Some of them are, first of all, sickness benefit at the rate of 70%, that would be in the form of salary in case of any certified illness and which lasts for a maximum of 91 days in any year. Next one is the medical benefits to an employee and his family members. Then comes the maternity benefit to the women who are pregnant that are provided with paid leaves. Next is that if the death of the employee happens while on work, then the 90% of the salary is given to his dependents in the form of a monthly payment after the death of the employee. Next are the funeral expenses and the old age medical care expenses. Next we come on to the compliances that arise after ESIC registration. So the establishment needs to comply with the following after registering under the ESIC. First is maintaining the attendance register, then maintaining a complete register for wages of their workers, then an inspection book is required to be maintained, then a monthly return and challan is to be filed by the 15th of the succeeding month, and lastly maintaining a register that records any accidents that happened on the premises. Next is the returns to be filed after ESIC registration. So after the registration under ESIC has been granted, the employers have to file ESI return, and that too on half-yearly basis. Now for filing such return, the following documents would be required. First one is the register of attendance of the employees, the form 6 register, register of wages, register of any accident which has happened on the premises of the business, and lastly the monthly returns and challans. Now coming on to the last part of our video, we will discuss about some of the frequently asked questions. So first one is, what is the procedure for registration of the employer? So an employer shall apply in form 1 within 15 days after the act becomes applicable to a unit or their establishment. Then is it mandatory for the employer to register under ESI? So in answer to this, we can very well say that yes, it is mandatory requirement for every employer who comes under the act to register their factory or establishment. Next, what are the compliance requirements? So every employer covered under this act has to comply with various compliances such as deposit of monthly contribution in order to file half-yearly return and report to ESI authorities if there is any change in business activity, address, ownership, and the management maintenance of register and records. Next, what are the benefits granted to the insured employees are transferable? So no, the rights to receive any benefit under this act is not transferable. After that, is it mandatory for the employer to register under the scheme? So yes, it is the statutory responsibility of the employer to register their factory or establishment under the ESI Act within 15 days from the date when the Act becomes applicable to them. Next is what is ESI code. So ESI code is basically a 17-digit identification number which is allotted to every registered establishment. This number is generated through the ESI portal on submission of the required information by the employer or generated on receipt of a survey report from the Social Security officer. After that comes who will be eligible for ESI. So to be eligible for ESI scheme, the employee or the worker's monthly salary should not exceed Rs 21,000 and 25,000 for the people with disability. Then when should we register for ESI? So ESI registration is mandatory once a company or any other entity employs 10 or more low earning employees. So according to the Act, an employee earning less than 15,000 per month needs to contribute 1.75% of his or her pay towards the ESI, while 4.75% will be contributed towards the said ESIC scheme by his or her employer. So this was all about ESIC registration. For any query, contact Rajput, Jain and Associates. Thank you.